Welcome to the Audacity to Podcast, episode 31, Rethinking, and more podcasts about podcasting. Welcome back to another episode of the Audacity to Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel J. Lewis, also known as the Ramen Noodle. That's my Twitter name, by the way. This is the podcast, giving you the guts and teaching you the tools to podcast with passion, organization, and dialogue. Thank you so much for coming and listening to another episode. And it has been a while, sadly. I think, end of January was the last time I was able to record an episode. Some stuff just got in the way, some illness, Valentine's Day I planned to take a day off for that, and just some other things came up. And so let me get right into this, because there are some things that I've been rethinking, and I've posted a couple of these things on the website over at theaudacitytopodcast.com. Two things that I've been rethinking, and I'll just briefly mention my conclusions of those two things. First of all is, in the past, I've talked about a podcaster's theme for WordPress, and this is what I was planning to make as a theme for WordPress designed specifically for podcasters, because of all of the podcasts and podcasters out there. Sure, there are podcasts about web design, and there are podcasts about podcasting, but I'm one of the few people who likes to talk about how to podcast, and I'm a web designer, and I know what works for podcasts and what doesn't work on websites, and I know how to design websites. So I had this idea of, I will design the podcaster's theme. I even registered the domain name podcasterstheme.com. I was very surprised that it wasn't taken. But I've been rethinking that, and you can read on the blog at theaudacitytopodcast.com. Read some more of my thoughts. I've been rethinking that because I realized there are many really good themes and frameworks out there that work good for podcasters. What's missing aren't the themes. It's some of the things beyond the themes. Stuff like, I think my subscribe and follow widget is an effective way to present that kind of information, but that doesn't exist in all themes or as a widget on its own, and it's not very customizable in other cases. So I thought maybe I should ditch this idea of a podcaster's theme and instead familiarize myself with these other themes. There are themes like Thesis, Genesis, Standard Theme, Wow themes, all of these different themes like that, or theme frameworks. And all of those are highly supported. There's a whole community that use them, and they have premium features that have been taking me a while to try and program into my own theme. I am not a programmer. I'm a designer, not a programmer. So that's already against me in making a theme. And several other things that made me just realize, even if I could release this theme, it wouldn't sell very much because other themes are already so popular. And when it did sell, I wouldn't be able to provide the support that my customers would need. So I've rethought that idea, and instead will be switching to a theme framework and designing my site for that theme framework. I'm leaning toward Genesis theme, actually, and you can see the link to that. It's an affiliate link, actually. Noodle.mx/Genesis. And there's also Thesis, which is you can access at Noodle.mx/Thesis, or Noodle.mx/Standard Theme for another theme out there that's really nice, Standard Theme. And I've been looking at all three of these, considering all sorts of things and looking at how they work and how they function, and as frameworks, not just as themes and how they look, but as frameworks and what kind of options they present me that are programmed into the theme. I don't necessarily care how it looks to an extent, because I'm a designer, so I will design it to look however I want it to look. But what theme I do use, I don't want it to look like everything else that everyone else uses, which I think Thesis tends to do. its thesis tends to all look the same because of the way it's set up. So I've rethought that, and I'm sorry that I won't be releasing a podcaster's theme, but this does mean I will be able to focus more effort on producing website resources for podcasters, like certain things that podcasters want from a designer that they don't already have, like the subscribe and follow widget or other things that can help people make their websites for their podcasts function or work better. An additional thing I've been rethinking is I've always debated with myself, ever since I made the decision, I've debated with myself whether all of the Noodle.mx Network podcasts should really be on a single site, Noodle.mx. There are several other podcast networks that do this. GSPN.TV and Twit.tv are two very popular podcast networks. Also, Revision 3. There's the Lifestyle Pod Network. All sorts of podcast networks do this, where they are all on a single site. But you know me. You know I like to rethink things and constantly reevaluate things and approach things with critical thinking and ask myself, why am I really doing this? And is this the best way to do this? And I've come to the conclusion that I don't think it's the best way for me to combine all of my podcasts on a single site. And one reason for that is I'm trying to get each of my shows promoted more within a certain niche. And that is the Ramen Noodle is a clean comedy podcast. It's one of very few clean comedy podcasts left. And I'm trying to get it promoted based on clean comedy. Now, it's easier to do that if it's its own website. So the RamenNoodle.com would be actually the RamenNoodle.com, not a part of Noodle.mx. But by having it as its own site, I can focus on getting it ranked well as clean comedy. And then my other sites, like the Audacity to podcast.com, I can work on getting it ranked well for Audacity and podcasting and how to podcast and so on with each of the sites. I think it would be a lot easier and better to do that with separate sites than one mega site where everything is trying to combine to this one ultra force. It's kind of like jack of all trades, master of none. I think that's in a way how Noodle Mix has been working. Additionally, having separate websites will allow me to go back to branding each site individually. To see a good example of this, look at nlcast.com. This is from one of the people that I highly respect in podcasting, James Kinnison, and who inspired me in many ways, and I highly respect. What he does is he has his main site, nlcast.com, and then all of his separate podcasts have their own websites, their own themes and designs to them. He doesn't do as much cross-promotion between them, but having separate sites, the cross-promotion can still be there. The advantages of a single site are where everything is all on one site, so you can easily get to other podcasts and other episodes and shows, or maybe accidentally. Well, I want it to be easy for the listeners, not easy for me, the publisher. I want it easy for both of us. But I think splitting up the sites is the better way to go, and then that will allow me to make things look great. The way I will be doing that is by using WordPress Multisite, or it used to be called WordPress Multi-User, WPMU, but it's now WPMS Multisite. And I will explain in more detail later on how you can do that, but that is the way that I will be looking at doing it with domain mapping and such. So everything will run from a single installation of WordPress, and I will have a master admin control to it. But then these separate sites will have their own admins too, but I have a master admin. It'll be really cool how that will work, and I will explain that later in a different episode sometime after I've got it set up. And finally, another thing that I've been rethinking is the weekly podcasting schedule. See, let me get a little personal for a moment. I have a full-time job. I have a wife. I have this podcasting hobby, or this podcasting thing, and also the freelancing thing. And that's a lot to fit into life. And I'm finding that certain things are suffering from it, and something has to go or something has to be changed. And there are certain directions that I'd like to go, but can't at this moment. And top priority to myself, though, is my marriage. And nothing will come before my marriage. I know there is another podcaster out there. I'm not sure if he's still podcasting, but he let his podcasting get in front of his marriage, and his marriage died because of that. Actually, I think it might have happened to a couple podcasters out there. I don't want to let that happen. I want my marriage to be first and foremost. And I want to continue giving to you guys. So what I'll be doing is I'm switching to a bi-weekly podcast schedule. Now, I'll podcast every week, but each episode of the Ramen Noodle and the Audacity to Podcast will flip back and forth each week. So this week, February 28th, I recorded the Ramen Noodle and the Audacity to Podcast. Next week, March 1st, will be the Audacity to Podcast. The week after that, March 7th, next week will be March 7th. So that'll be the Audacity to Podcast. The week after that, March 14th, will be the Ramen Noodle, the Clean Comedy Podcast. Then the week after that, back to the Audacity to Podcast. The week after that, the Ramen Noodle. And it'll flip back and forth like that each week. And if you're a little confused, don't worry, just watch Twitter. I'll be tweeting about what show is coming up. And also on the website, the schedule will be updated to reflect that. And this is what I'll be doing for a little while to try and experiment with how's this work for timing and such. And a benefit that it gives is you've probably gotten to know me as liking the details, sharing things in detail. And sometimes I feel like I can't quite do that because I haven't had enough time within a week to really thoroughly research and give a full, thorough answer to you on something about podcasting or Audacity. So having 2 weeks now to prepare that, I think the shows will be much better. So this does mean the shows may end up being a little bit longer. I've usually tried to keep the shows to half an hour, which if you look at the past shows, you'll see that I haven't been doing well with that because I've had a lot of in-depth stuff to cover. But as I continue to cover things in depth, I think allowing myself to go up to an hour might be better. And since it'll be bi-weekly, hopefully that won't frustrate too many people. But please share your feedback with me. I would love to hear it. Positive, negative, critical feedback, constructive, whatever. I'd love to hear it from you. Send that to feedback@Noodle.mx or call 859-353-4332. Or you can leave a comment on the show notes at theaudacitytopodcast.com/31, and I'll have links to those other blog posts, and so you can see the conversation I've had with listeners as well regarding each of those topics, like the podcaster's theme, switching, and also the megasite idea. And I'll have a blog post soon about going bi-weekly with the episodes and alternating. But don't worry, because this doesn't mean you're going to get less content. Like I'm saying, I will allow myself to podcast longer and still be able to get in-depth, maybe even more in-depth, and give you more details about how to do things with Audacity or in podcasting. Additionally, I'm not sure if you knew this, but I'm not the only one podcasting about podcasting. I'm one of several people podcasting about podcasting. And I want you to know what other podcasts there are. Now, you might think that these are my competition, or I'm their competition, but that's really not the case. Like I've shared before, I really don't believe in this idea of competition so much anymore, because you might listen to several of these other podcasters, and I don't think you'd necessarily say we're in competition with each other. And if you have a question about podcasting, then you probably know, like, you're going to go to a certain person. Or like if you have a question about Audacity, you probably know Daniel Lewis probably knows the answer to this, so I'll send it to him. If you have a question about something else, you might send it to one of the other podcasters. So this might seem counterintuitive, but I will share with you some of these or all of the other current podcasts about podcasting. First of all, you've come to know the Audacity to Podcast as focusing on Audacity and approaching things from the like web design or creative angle. But I tend to get very in-depth with things, and I explain the complete process. I explain the complete process of how to do things to the point that I try to make sure that by the end of it, you can follow along and do exactly what I'm explaining. So I get very in-depth with things. I tend to explain things more technically and share the technical details. Another great podcast that is similar in this is Andy White's Podcasting Advisor. That's podcastingadvisor.com, or as he says it, podcastingadvisor.com, because it is the American spelling. Advisor is the American spelling for advisor. So that's podcastingadvisor.com. Andy hasn't released an episode in a little while, and we actually ended up starting about the same time. But he is a podcaster after my own heart in that he shares details in his. When he explains something, he explains it in detail. So you're not just learning what tool to use. You're learning about the tool, why you should use that tool, and how that tool really works so you can understand it better. That's what he and I really like to do when we share things, is we talk about why this works this way, or helping you understand really how to use the tool, not just giving you a recipe for the success, which there's nothing wrong with that either. On the flip side of things, my friend Ray Ortega has 2 podcasts about podcasting. He has Podcast Quick Tips, which is why the reason I say on the flip side of things is that Podcast Quick Tips are quick tips about podcasting. Each episode is usually under 10 minutes. So he shares something quick as a tip about podcasting and how you can improve your show that you may already have, or if you're on the fence about to start an episode, he gives you some quick tips on things you can do as you're starting your episode. And his other show is The Podcaster's Studio. And both of these are at thepodcastersstudio.com. Yes, that is with 2 S's in the middle of it. And you can check that out. Both of his shows in thepodcastersstudio.com, he usually has something that he wants to talk about in addition to answering a question. And he has some good forums on the website. He has great experience with video podcasting. Even though the Podcaster Studio is an audio podcast, he runs other video podcasts. So he is great at describing how you can do things in video format if you're looking to branch out into a video podcast. But he still gives principles that apply to audio podcasts. And if you want a start to finish approach to podcasting, like if you're thinking all of these things that everybody's talking about are great, but I don't know where to start, here's the podcast I recommend. Podcasting from Scratch. This is from Hank Davis, and you can find it at unitedpodcasters.com and click on the podcast button up at the top in the nav bar. Podcasting from Scratch goes from start to finish. He hasn't had an episode in a while, but still, this is valuable stuff in that he shows you from the beginning how to start and continue and build and improve. So it's very chronological. Don't just start listening to the latest episodes. Start at the beginning of those episodes and listen to them. And they are great for starting from scratch. The great title, Podcasting from Scratch. Then there's my friend, and again, these are in no particular order, but there's my friend Cliff Ravenscraft. He was my inspiration in podcasting, and he has been so giving and so encouraging as both a podcaster and even as a personal friend. And he's going to be helping me a lot with PodCamp Cincinnati, and really excited about that. And actually, it was originally his idea. So it's kind of funny that now I'm organizing it and he's going to help me. But still, got a great friendship with Cliff. And his podcast is podcastanswerman.com, at podcastanswerman.com. And as the name suggests, his is a great question and answer podcast. You might think that wouldn't be too fun to listen to, just someone else's questions with his answers. But look at the success of the same kind of thing on the radio, like Dave Ramsey or Clark Howard, financial experts, that almost their entire show is just question and answers. You have questions about podcasting. Cliff can give answers. He's the podcast answer man. So he receives all of these answers and all of these questions and answers them within his podcast at podcastanswerman.com. There's also Podcasters Emporium at podcastersemporium.com. That's EMPORIUM. These are two guys from Australia that podcast about podcasting, and where Andy White and I focus on details about podcasting, these two guys from Australia focus on, I guess you could say, the options or the alternatives. When they approach the subject about podcasting, they give you all of the different options. For example, when they talk about recording in Skype, they don't just tell you recording a Skype phone call. They don't just tell you how to record Skype with a particular program. They tell you all of these other programs you could check out and use, programs that if you're on Windows or Mac or all of these things. So most of their shows are just full of all of this information that I find myself going back to the show notes and making sure I got all of the links that they mention and such, because they mention so many different alternatives. It's great because you get so many different options of things that you can try as they talk about podcasting. And then finally is the School of Podcasting. This is Dave Jackson. And Dave Jackson and Cliff Ravenscraft have been podcasting about podcasting probably the longest of any of the current podcasters. There is also Podcast 411, but it's pod faded, I'm pretty sure. There hasn't been anything new in a year, I believe. School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson. He talks about podcasting, and also he does answer questions, but usually he's talking about a particular topic that you need to know about podcasting, or something new that's developed, or some new way that you could try things. And when you subscribe to all of these podcasts, for one thing, you're going to notice your podcatcher, like iTunes, is going to fill up easily, because many of these people podcast weekly or bi-weekly. But the content is so valuable. It is priceless. I listen to these guys. Some of them listen to me too. We're not in competition really with each other. We are painting a 3D object from different angles. We each approach podcasting from our different perspectives and different experience and backgrounds and angles and such. And as you listen to all of these, you'll hear some of these different perspectives. Like one person says, never, ever, ever record into your computer. Whereas another person says, it's all right to record into your computer as long as you do this. One person says, never use a condenser mic. Another person says, use this condenser mic. It's great. One person says, use only Behringer mixers. The other person says, use only Alesis or Mackie mixers. Or one person says, always compress your audio afterward with a audio compressor. Someone else says, buy a hardware compressor or don't compress it at all. So you're going to get conflicting views. That's all right. That is perfectly all right. You can find the middle ground, or it really depends on the equipment you use and the setup that you have and the results that you want to achieve. So listen to all of these podcasts. Again, and I'm not going to approach this from the same order, I think, but there is, of course, this podcast you're listening to, the Audacity podcast, Podcasting Advisor, Podcast Quick Tips, the Podcaster's Studio, Podcast Answer Man, Podcasting from Scratch, and School of Podcasting. Check out all of these shows and subscribe to them, because I hope you're not going to suffer just because I'm switching to a bi-weekly format with my episodes. I still want to give as much as possible, but we'll be switching to bi-weekly. But in the meantime, if you're like me and you love hearing and talking about podcasting, this will give you more places where you can hear and talk about podcasting, interact with the co-hosts. And how could I forget? It wasn't on my list that I created a while back, but podcaststarter.com. I can't believe I forgot. Oh, there it is. It's right there on my list. I didn't see it. Podcaststarter.com is from James Kinnison, who started the NLcast network of podcasts. And Podcast Starter, his approach to podcasting is podcasting as a hobby. And that's really what I'm having to switch to, in a sense, kind of downgrade myself to trying to be a professional podcaster to now downgrading it for the moment as podcasting as a hobby, being a hobbyist podcaster. And James Kinnison's podcast, podcaststarter.com, is all about helping the amateur podcaster, or helping the person who's podcasting as a hobby, not necessarily as a career or trying to make lots of money or anything like that, but just as a hobby. And what you're going to find as you listen to these different episodes is there are plenty of topics that each of us haven't covered, but one other person has covered. Like intros and outros, for example, like I covered in the previous episode, episode 30. I don't think any other podcaster has talked about how you could make effective intros and the different elements of intros. I could be wrong there, but I covered that in extreme detail. Now, someone else has an episode. James Kinnison did an episode about making a promo for your show, and he covers some great points about how you should make a promo for your podcast. And it's great information there. And the same thing with all of these other podcasts. Subscribe to them and then see if you're not getting your fix on podcasting. And you'll find that hopefully all of these episodes about podcasting will inspire you to be better in your podcast, to do better, to podcast more frequently, or maybe it will give you that push, that nudge that you need to start podcasting. Maybe you've been thinking about it for a while and you're listening to all of these shows, and maybe when it gets in your mind so much, you just won't be able to stop thinking about it until you actually do it. So hopefully all of these will inspire you to do that. Again, all of these show notes, or all of these links, will be in the show notes at theaudacitypodcast.com/31. And you can get the links to all of these podcasts. And when you listen to them, and if you send them any messages or anything, or even if you just start listening to them, let them know that I sent you. Not like I have an affiliate or anything like that, or I'm getting paid, but I just like it when people can know that they're getting new audience members and people are sending them to their podcast. So if you go and start listening to any of these shows, just let them know that I sent you. And that'll be kind of cool as we can help each other out, and we can all paint this 3-dimensional picture, maybe 4-dimensional picture of podcasting, and help you, the listener, to podcast even better. So that's it for now in this episode. In upcoming episodes, I'll be talking about making outros for your podcast, elements of a good outro. I'll be talking about making promos, and I'll be talking about bumpers within your episodes, or the segues. Those will probably be separate episodes. So please, especially if you have questions or ideas along these lines, if you know of some podcasts that you really like how they do their outro, I'm not just talking about what music they use, but how they do their outros, or how they do their segues to different segments within their episodes, or how they do their promos. Or if you want to send me your promo to be considered and reviewed within the episode, please send all of this feedback to feedback@Noodle.mx, and you can send audio files too, or call 859-353-4332. And the links to this, or the contact information, will also be in the show notes at theaudacitytopodcast.com/31. And remember that you can also send me your questions or comments via email or phone. Again, that information is feedback@Noodle.mx or call 859-353-4332. Check the episode schedule on Noodle.mx or the AudacityToPodcast.com. And join us for another live show on March 7th at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Now that I've given you some of the guts and taught you some of the tools, it's time for you to go podcast with passion, organization, and dialogue. I'm Daniel Lewis. Thank you very much for listening. Oh, and follow me on twitter.com/the Ramen Noodle. The Audacity to Podcast is a proud member of the Noodle.mx Network over at Noodle.mx. Get more of our podcasts with clean comedy, Christian movie reviews with critical thinking, and much more over at Noodle.mx, the Noodle.mx Network at Noodle.mx. The Audacity to Podcast is also a proud member of the Tech Podcast Network, where you can find all sorts of podcasts about technology. Find more at techpodcasts.com. That's techpodcasts.com.